So when we're talking about circles, today we're looking at their equations, and we're going to graph them and talk about their equations. Eventually we're going to be looking at pictures of circles and lines in and around the circles and answer some questions about the circles in that way. But for today we're just looking at their equations. So the standard form of a circle looks like this. And notice everything is squared. Also notice there's a plus in the middle. There is something that's different when that's not a plus or when things are not squared. Once your equation is written in this form, HK stands for the center of the circle. And you do have to take the square root of whatever's over here because you want to get R, and R represents the radius of the circle. Now, I don't know what you remember about circles that you've done in the past, but when you have a circle, the center always is just in the middle. And then the radius is a segment coming from the center to any point around the circle. So from the center to a point on the circle, that right there represents the radius. Okay? And I could draw that anywhere. Any segment that you draw the center to part of the circle represents the radius. And all of the radius are the same size. So I could go from here to here. Like any of those are all the same. They all represent the same value. And that's what makes it a circle, because the distance from the center to the outside is the same all the way around. Okay? So when you're looking at an equation and you want to find the center and the radius, notice that HK was the center. You just change the values. See, they're both negative here, and we made them positive when we said it was the center. Okay, so if this is the equation, you just change them to positive. So the center comes out to be 4, 2. The radius comes out to be, notice this said R squared, and R was the radius, so that you just take the square root of whatever that number is, that represents the radius. So the radius is going to be 5, because that's the square root of 25. So if I do the center on the next one, I'm just going to change the signs again. 5, -10. And then I want to take the square root of the 16, which comes out to be 4, and that represents the radius. Alright, the next one's pretty much the same, but there's not anything with the y squared. You see how there's always like a parentheses and then a square? If there's not a parentheses and not a square, that just means 0 represents that portion of it. So what do you think the center would be here? -1, 0. And then it has a 30 here. We can't take the square root of 30, like we don't know what that is. We could find the decimal, but we'll just write the radius as square root of 30. So I wanted you to see that one so that you would know that sometimes you're going to have a square root there, and that's okay. Okay? So what do you think the center is going to be on D? 0, 0. Because there's nothing there. There's no parentheses, anything. That just means 0. 0 represents the center. And then we take the square root of 81 and get 9, and that represents the radius. Alright, the last one. Try that real quick. So the center would be 0, 4. And the radius would be square root of 1, which is 1. Okay. We're going to be talking about graphing those in a little bit, and what that looks like as far as the graph is concerned. But if you know the center and you know the radius, the graph becomes really, really easy. Okay? So after we look at the equation and tell what the center and radius is, we also want to be able to write the equation. Okay? If I give you the center and give you the radius, and I say, okay, write the equation, this is what we would do here. Okay? So you change the sign on each of these, and we put x, change the sign, squared, plus y, change the sign, squared, and then we do 6 squared. Okay, 6 squared is 36, and so that would be equal to 36. Questions about that one? Try B. So it'd be x, change the sign, squared, and then a y, and then change the sign and squared. Square the 1, and you get a 1. Okay. Alright, next one. Basically the same thing. X minus 5 squared, y plus 4 squared. What I wanted to show you was the radius. The radius is square root of 5. When you square a square root, the square root pretty much just goes away. So that will give you 5. But if you weren't sure what square root of 5 squared was, you could put it in Desmos and figure that out. Try D. So this was x plus 3 squared plus y squared. If you put y minus 0 squared, that would be correct. That would be fine. And then square root of 19 squared is 19. And remember, you could just put square root 19 and then squared like that in Desmos, and it'll give you the 19. Okay? So let's talk about what the graph would look like. Like, you guys know what a circle looks like. So as far as graphing it, what you're going to do is you're going to start with the center, whatever the center is. And then you're going to start with the radius, and then you're going to connect. Okay? So first all I want to do is figure out what the center is, which is 2, negative 1. And then I want to figure out what the radius is. Okay, the square root of 4. Square root of 4 is 2, so that's the radius. Okay? And so what you do to graph it is you start at the center, so 2, negative 1. And then from the center, whatever it tells you the radius is, you're going to count up and over and around to figure out how to draw it. So since the radius is 2, I'm going to go up 2 and put a point. I'm going to go left 2 and put a point, always back to the center when you do it. Down 2 and put a point, and then left 2 and put a point, and then I just connect it with the circle, and it's okay. It's not going to be perfect, and that's the way it's going to look. So you graph the center, and then you graph whatever the radius is. You just go that far around, all the way around, and then you just connect it. Okay, let's look at B, 3B. So first off, I would try to figure out what the center is. So what's the center? Negative 1, negative 3. Okay, so negative 1, negative 3, and put our point. Okay, our radius is kind of tricky here. It's square root of 5. I don't know what square root of 5 is, but I can find out. And it's going to be a decimal, so we'll have to estimate. We got approximately 2.23 or something like that. So we're just going to say 2.2. Okay? And so what that means whenever we graph it is we're going to go up 2 and a little bit more. Then we're going to go right 2 and a little bit more. Down 2 and a little bit more. Left 2 and a little bit more. And notice that none of that was exact, but we know that we went a little bit more than it said, and so it seems like that should work just fine. It really is not difficult. to really graph those that much, but I do want to show you. You can put these in Desmos, especially if you were doing multiple choice and it asks you, well, which is which. You can put it in just like you see it, with the X's and the Y's. This is really good because it used to be in the other calculators that we had, you couldn't put it in that way, but here it is. I put it in exactly the way it was written with the equals, and then it gave me the circle. It does not show you where the center is, it just shows you like some of the points that you'll see. It shows you where it crosses the x-axis. It'll show you the top and the bottom, but it won't always show you the sides. But that would be good enough for you to figure out what you needed, especially if it were multiple choice. So you put it in exactly the way it's written with the equals. This is one time where the equals matter, and you just make sure you put that equals in there. Okay? Alright. Interestingly enough, the circles will not always be written in that easy form. Okay? There's another form that it might be written in, and that's what's going to take a little bit more of our time to talk about how we actually figure out the center and the radius to get it in that other form. Okay? So there's some directions here, and so I'll explain what you do. What it says is move all x's and y's to one side and constants to the other side. Okay, what I'm going to do is anything that has an x, I'm going to put it together. And I'm going to leave a little space. Okay? And then I'm going to take anything with a y, and I'm going to put it together and leave a little space. And then the 4, because it's a constant, I'm going to move it to the other side. When you move it, it becomes -4. Okay, questions so far about what I've done? I'll make that bigger till we need the graph. Good so far? Okay, here's what you do. It says take half of the coefficient of x and square it, add that number to the other side. That's kind of a strange direction, so here's what you do. We're going to make parentheses, because what we want to happen is we want it to look like a circle. So we know that we need a parentheses and squared on each one. Okay? We're going to put an x here, and we're going to put a y here. Okay? The number that you're going to put in the parentheses is half of the 14, and it's going to be half of the 12. So you take half of 14, you divide it by 2. You get 7. Okay? So you take half, but then you have to square it. It's 49. 49 goes in this missing place, and when I put it in the missing place, I have to also add it on the other side, because what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. Okay? Let's do another one. So half of 12, divide the 12 by 2, is 6. That's a minus, so leave the minus. Square it. 6 squared is 36. So 36 goes in the missing place. If I add it here, I have to add it here. And then I add those three numbers together. So -4 plus 49 plus 36. You can do it in Desmos if you want to. And you get 81. And now, from looking at this equation, I can tell that the center is -7, 6, and the radius is 9. Now, the questions you might be asked here, you might just be asked what the center and radius is. Guys, you really can get this on Desmos. I think it's important for you to know where I'm getting the things from, but technically, you could put that original equation in there, x squared plus y squared plus 14x minus 12y plus 4 equals 0. Okay, here's our graph. Now, the hard part is like trying to figure out where the center is exactly. It's kind of hard to figure that out. Maybe if I zoom out a little bit. If I can figure out where the top is, I know that the center is going to be at a -7 because that's where top is. As far as figuring out the middle, I might need to just count it and like sort of figure it out. It does look like it would be 6, but you might have to count it and figure it out. After you know where the center is when you graph it, if you count over, you could figure out the radius is 9 and then go from there. So that would be like a check for you. If it just says write the equation, you could graph it, find the center and radius from the graph, and then figure it out, or you could just do it this way. Okay? Or you could do it both ways and then just check it. So let's look at B. I think sometimes the graph is hard to tell, like where that center is, and so that's why I think it's really important to do it this way. But it doesn't matter to me which way you do it. So, first step is get the x's together and leave a space. Get the y's together and leave a space. The number is already over there on the other side, and that's a good thing. Okay? We know that what we're wanting to happen is we want x and then a square, and then y and then a square, and then a number. That's what we want to get. Okay? So we take 8 divided by 4. I mean, just the 8 divided by 2, sorry. And we get 4. So I know this will be plus 4. You divide it by 2, and then you square it. So 4 squared is 16. If I put a 16 there, I have to put a 16 here. I'm going to put it underneath it just because I'm running out of room on my paper. Okay, I'm going to take half of the 32 and get 16. 16 squared, I don't know what that is, but it's 256. And I'm going to add that over here. So then I'm going to take -263 plus 16 plus 256, and I get 9. So what's the center of my circle? -4, -16. And then my radius is the square root of 9, which is 3. Okay, so you take, first of all, you do have to move the 10y over and you make it a negative, so that's important. But I know it's going to be something, x something squared, y something squared, and then a number. So I take half of the 2 and get 1. 1 squared is 1. So I know I'm adding a 1 here, which means I add a 1 here. Okay? And then I take half of the 10 and bring the sign. Square it, so that's a 25. It's always positive when you square it. And then add 25 on this side. And then when you add all those together, I do think you get 81. So the center is -1, 5. And the radius is 9. Now, on D, it's written really strange, but I want to work on this one with you. Most of the ones you'll have will be more like A, B, or C, but I wanted just to show you D, just in case you get something weird like that. So I'm going to move all of these over, and when I move them over, I'm going to change the sign. And then the 6y stays. And I'm going to go ahead and move that over too, because I know that that number needs to be on the other side. Okay, now that it looks like that, let's see what you can do with it. Go ahead and try it. Okay, so you group the x's together, and you group the y's together. Half of 24 is 12. 12 squared is 144. If I add it here, I have to add it here. half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. If I add it here, I add it here. And I think, is it 16 that you get here? And so that tells me that the center is negative 12, negative 3. And the radius is 4. Again, you can graph those. You can graph like this equation and you can graph this equation. There'll be some questions that just say which of these is written in standard form. And if you couldn't figure this part out, you could graph them all and just see which one matches or whatever. But that's the process that you would use. All right, last two are just interesting questions to talk about. You won't necessarily have to do a lot with these, but I wanted to show it to you anyway, just so that you're aware. So first of all, in A, it tells me that we have a circle where the center is negative 13, negative 16. And we have a point on the circle at negative 10, negative 16. Okay, so although we don't have any graph paper here, I'm going to kind of estimate what it would look like. Okay, so the center is, it says negative 13, which is down here somewhere, and negative 16, which is here. So there's the center. And it says there's a point on the circle at negative 10, negative 16. So if this was negative 13, maybe negative 10's here, and there's another point on the circle. Okay? And so it's saying that our circle would look something like that. Although I drew it not necessarily to scale. Questions want us to write an equation. And we already know the center. What else do we need to write an equation? The radius. You need the center and the radius. That always helps you to write the equation of the circle. Now, because of the way this one is written, I can look at it and tell exactly what the radius is going to be. Because, see, this is at negative 13. This is at negative 10. What's the radius? 3. I can tell that the radius is 3 by looking at my little sketch here. You can't always tell that, and I'll show you in just a second, but as long as it lines up like that, you can tell what the radius would be. And so that's an interesting one. If I write the equation now, I'm going to have x, change the sign squared, y, change the sign squared, and then square the radius, square the 3, and so you get 9. Now, I'm going to go ahead and draw this one, but I will tell you this one's harder to figure out. And I'll show you why. Here's 18, and here's negative 13. So there's my center. Oh, diameter, that's just a point. And then 4, and then negative 3. And you know, I'm not really doing it to scale. But here's what it tells me. That is the diameter. Okay? Diameter goes from one side of the circle to the other side of the circle. So if I draw the circle, although I didn't do it exactly like a circle again, that's sort of what it would look like. Okay? I want to show you two formulas. I don't think you'll really have to know them, but I wanted to show them to you anyway because you did them in Math 1. The center is going to be the midpoint between those two endpoints. So what you do is you add the x's and divide by 2. And then you add the y's and divide by 2. That will tell you what the center is. Okay? And so 18 plus 4 is 22. Divided by 2, you get 11. I think this is negative 16 over 2, which is negative 8. That's how you would get the center. And just in case you ever needed it, I won't be giving you questions like this. All right. To get the radius, what we're going to do is we're going to have to find the distance between some points. I would suggest finding the distance between these 2 points right here and then dividing by 2 to get the radius. Okay? There's a couple ways you can do distance, but I like doing distance with the Pythagorean theorem because we already know how to do the Pythagorean theorem. We just kind of make a triangle where the hypotenuse is the diameter. Diameter is what we're looking for. This part right here is going to be from -3 to -13, so I know that's 10. This part right here is going to be from 4 to 18, so I know that's 14. And then I can do Pythagorean theorem to get the hypotenuse. So I can do 10 squared plus 14 squared, and then the square root of that. It's a strange decimal. Something like that. Okay. That is the diameter. Okay. The radius is half of that. So I divide that by 2. And then to write the equation, we're going to write x minus 11 squared plus y plus 8 squared. And then we're going to square our radius, so 8.6 squared. And we get the regular old number of 74. Again, that one is not one that you will necessarily see on the work that I'm going to give you, but I wanted you to see how you use the distance and how you use the midpoint to find all of that information.